A hardworking man named David enters a luxury store one day, seeking to make a purchase, but instead finds himself mistreated by an employee named Kelly, who quickly judges him based on his appearance. What she didn't expect was that her actions were being quietly observed by someone who could change both her life and David's in a way she never imagined. What was it about this encounter that left such a lasting impression on everyone involved? And how did David's quiet dignity change Kelly's life forever? Let's find out. But before we dive into the story, comment below where you're watching from today, and if you enjoy this tale of redemption and learning from our mistakes, don't forget to subscribe. The gleaming glass doors of Luxe Emporium swung open, inviting another wave of well-heeled customers into its opulent embrace. Chandeliers cast a warm glow over polished marble floors, illuminating displays of designer handbags, sparkling jewelry, and bespoke suits. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfumes and the hushed murmur of affluent shoppers. Kelly Matthews stood behind the sleek mahogany counter, her perfectly manicured nails tapping rhythmically on its smooth surface. At 32, she was the store's top saleswoman, a position she clawed her way to over the past 5 years. Her ash-blonde hair was pulled back in a severe bun, accentuating her sharp cheekbones and piercing blue eyes. She wore her success like armor, her designer outfit a testament to the commission she'd earned. "Welcome to Luxe Emporium," Kelly purred as an elegantly dressed couple entered. Her eyes darted to their wrists, noting matching Rolex watches. "Can I interest you in our latest collection of evening wear? We just received a stunning shipment from Milan." The couple nodded appreciatively, and Kelly's smile widened. This was her element, reading people, gauging their worth, and steering them towards the most expensive items. It was a game she excelled at, one that kept her at the top of the sales charts month after month. As she guided the couple towards a rack of shimmering gowns, Kelly's gaze swept across the store. She noted a young woman eyeing a display of designer sunglasses, mentally calculating the potential commission. Her attention then shifted to an older gentleman examining a case of luxury watches. Kelly made a mental note to approach him next, already rehearsing her pitch for the limited edition timepieces. The bell above the door chimed again, and Kelly looked up, her practiced smile faltering for a moment. A man in a wheelchair had entered the store, his movements careful as he navigated between the closely spaced displays. He was black, probably in his mid-40s, wearing a plain button-down shirt and khaki pants. Nothing about his appearance suggested he belonged in a place where the cheapest items still bore four-figure price tags. Kelly's lip curled slightly as she watched him. She'd seen his type before, people who came in just to gawk at things they could never afford, wasting her valuable time and attention. With a small huff of annoyance, she turned back to her current clients, determined to ignore the newcomer for as long as possible. David Williams took a deep breath as he entered Luxe Emporium, the weight of the moment not lost on him. It had taken months of saving and planning to reach this point, and he was determined to make the most of it. His eyes widened slightly at the opulence surrounding him, but he steeled himself, reminding himself that he had every right to be there. As he maneuvered his wheelchair through the store, David couldn't help but notice the sideways glances from other customers. He was used to it by now, the mix of curiosity, pity, and sometimes disdain that often greeted his presence in upscale establishments. But today wasn't about them. Today was about fulfilling a promise he'd made to himself years ago. David's gaze fell on a display of exquisitely crafted watches. He wheeled closer, admiring the intricate details of each timepiece. One, in particular, caught his eye, a classic design with a leather strap and a face that seemed to glow with an inner light. It reminded him of the watch his father used to wear, a cherished memory from his childhood. "Excuse me," he called out softly, hoping to catch the attention of a nearby salesperson. But the immaculately dressed woman seemed engrossed in conversation with another customer, her back pointedly turned towards him. David sighed, used to being overlooked. He continued to explore the store, taking in the array of luxury goods. Each item seemed to tell a story of craftsmanship and exclusivity. Despite the less-than-warm welcome, he couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement. After years of hard work and determination, he was finally in a position to make a significant purchase, something to mark how far he'd come. As he examined a display of fine leather goods, David became aware of a presence behind him. He turned his chair to find a saleswoman, Kelly, according to her name tag, regarding him with barely concealed impatience. "Can I help you?" Kelly asked, her tone making it clear that she doubted he needed any real assistance. David smiled warmly, choosing to ignore the underlying hostility. "Yes, actually, I was hoping to take a closer look at some of your watches. There's a particular style I'm interested in." But then a well-dressed couple entered the store, and Kelly perked up immediately. They exuded wealth, from their designer clothes to their confident bearing. These were the kind of clients she lived for, people who wouldn't balk at dropping tens of thousands of dollars on a whim. "Excuse me," Kelly said to David, not even trying to hide her eagerness to leave. "I need to attend to some other customers. Feel free to continue browsing, and let me know if you need anything." Her tone made it clear she hoped he wouldn't. As Kelly hurried away, her entire demeanor transforming as she approached the new arrivals, David watched her go with a mixture of sadness and resignation. He was used to this treatment, the way people often dismissed him based on his appearance and disability. But it never stopped stinging. For a moment, David considered leaving. The excitement he'd felt upon entering the store had dimmed, replaced by a familiar sense of not belonging. But then he thought of the promise he'd made to himself, the years of hard work that had brought him to this point. He wouldn't let one prejudiced salesperson rob him of this moment. With renewed determination, David continued to explore the store. He admired the craftsmanship of the leather goods, the sparkle of the jewelry, the elegant lines of the designer clothing. Each item represented not just luxury, but the culmination of a dream he'd held on to through years of struggle and perseverance. As he moved through the aisles, David became aware of a presence nearby. A well-dressed man stood a short distance away, seemingly engrossed in examining a display of cufflinks. But there was something about his posture, the way his gaze occasionally flicked in David's direction, that suggested he was paying close attention to what was happening. David dismissed the observation, focusing instead on the task at hand. He had come here with a purpose, and he wouldn't leave until he'd accomplished it. With or without Kelly's assistance, he was determined to make his purchase, a tangible symbol of how far he'd come and a reminder of the Father who had always believed in him. As David continued his solitary exploration of the store, Kelly busied herself with the new customers. She guided them from display to display, her charm turned up to full volume as she extolled the virtues of each item. This was where she excelled, reading the subtle cues of wealth and status, knowing exactly which pieces to highlight and which to downplay. But even as she worked her sales magic, a part of Kelly's attention remained fixed on David. She watched him out of the corner of her eye, waiting for him to give up the charade and leave. Each time he lingered over a particularly expensive item, she felt a twinge of annoyance. How dare he come in here, taking up space and wasting time when he clearly couldn't afford anything? The well-dressed man that David had noticed earlier continued his own circuit of the store. He moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to such surroundings, occasionally pausing to examine an item more closely. But his gaze, too, seemed to return frequently to the unfolding drama between Kelly and David. As the afternoon wore on, David felt his initial excitement giving way to a growing sense of frustration. He had spent hours carefully examining the store's offerings, mentally comparing different items and imagining how they might fit into his life. But without assistance, he found himself struggling to make a final decision. With a deep breath, he steeled himself and approached Kelly, who was arranging a display of silk scarves. "Excuse me," David said politely, his voice steady despite his nervousness. "I was hoping you could help me with something." Kelly turned, her lips tightening as she recognized him. She had hoped he would simply leave on his own, sparing her the discomfort of further interaction. "Yes," she replied, her tone clipped and impatient. David, choosing to ignore her obvious displeasure, pressed on. "I'm interested in purchasing a watch, but I'm having trouble deciding between a few models. I was wondering if you could provide some additional information about the differences in their movements and complications." Kelly's eyebrows rose, a mixture of disbelief and annoyance crossing her face. "The watches," she repeated, as if she couldn't quite believe what she was hearing. "Sir, our timepieces are quite expensive. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable looking at our selection of keychains or pens?" David felt a familiar sting of humiliation, but he refused to let it show. "I appreciate your concern," he said calmly, "but I assure you, I'm well aware of the prices. I'm particularly interested in comparing the celestial moon phase model with the Chronomaster perpetual calendar." Kelly's patience, already wearing thin, snapped. "Look," she said, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper, "I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but this isn't some window shopping mall. These watches cost more than most people make in a year. Wouldn't you be more comfortable somewhere, more suited to your budget?" David's hands tightened on the armrests of his wheelchair, but his voice remained calm. "I understand your skepticism, but I assure you, I'm here as a serious customer. All I'm asking for is the same assistance you'd provide to anyone else interested in making a purchase." Kelly let out an exasperated sigh, her eyes darting around the store as if seeking an escape. "Fine," she said, her tone dripping with condescension. "Follow me." As they made their way to the watch display, Kelly's steps quick and impatient while David's wheelchair moved at a steadier pace. Other customers began to take notice of the unfolding scene. A middle-aged couple exchanged uncomfortable glances, while a young woman in a designer suit frowned slightly, her eyes following David with a mixture of curiosity and concern. Kelly stopped abruptly in front of the watch case, causing David to brake suddenly to avoid colliding with her. "Here," she said, gesturing dismissively at the display. "These are the watches you mentioned. The celestial moon phase is on the left, the Chronomaster on the right. As you can see, they're both exquisite pieces, handcrafted by master horologists. The celestial features a moon phase complication, while the Chronomaster includes a perpetual calendar." Her explanation, while technically accurate, was delivered in a tone one might use to explain simple concepts to a child. David, determined to maintain his dignity, nodded thoughtfully. "Thank you," he said. "Could you tell me more about the specific movements used in each? I'm particularly interested in the accuracy and power reserve." Kelly's eyes narrowed, her suspicion growing. How did this man, who looked so out of place in her world of luxury, know to ask such specific questions? She was certain now that he must be playing some sort of trick, perhaps hoping to impress a hidden camera or win a bet with friends. "The movements," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm, "are, of course, of the highest quality. Swiss-made, hand-assembled, and tested to the most rigorous standards. But really, sir, don't you think these details are a bit academic? After all, it's not as if you'll actually be wearing one of these timepieces." David felt his cheeks burn with embarrassment, but he refused to back down. "I appreciate your opinion," he said firmly, "but I assure you, I'm here with every intention of making a purchase. Now about those movements, Dash." Kelly cut him off with a sharp laugh. "A purchase? Really? And how exactly do you plan to pay for a watch that costs more than that wheelchair of yours? Credit card? Monopoly money, perhaps?" Her voice had risen, drawing even more attention from the surrounding customers. A small crowd had begun to gather, their expressions a mix of shock, discomfort, and morbid fascination. David was acutely aware of their stares, feeling as if he were on display in some cruel exhibit. "I don't think my method of payment is any of your concern," David replied, his calm facade beginning to crack under the weight of Kelly's relentless hostility. "I'm simply asking for the information any customer would expect when considering a significant purchase." Kelly's laugh was bitter and mocking. "Any customer? Let's be honest here. You're not any customer. You don't belong here, and we both know it. This isn't a charity, and I'm not here to indulge your fantasies of wealth. Why don't you do us both a favor and find a store more appropriate for someone in your position?" The words hung in the air, sharp and cutting. David felt as if he'd been physically struck, the weight of years of similar encounters pressing down on him. He had faced discrimination before, had dealt with people's assumptions and prejudices, but rarely had it been so blatant, so cruel. For a moment, he considered leaving. The humiliation burned in his chest, and part of him longed to escape, to retreat to a world where he wasn't judged solely on his appearance or his disability. But another part, The part that had driven him to success against all odds refused to give in. My position? David repeated, his voice low but steady. And what position would that be, exactly? The position of a customer interested in making a purchase? Or are you referring to something else? Kelly's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her face before her mask of contempt slammed back into place. Don't play games with me, she hissed. Look at yourself. Look around you. This isn't your world. These watches? They're not for people like you. They're for successful people, important people, people who've earned the right to wear them. David's grip on his wheelchair tightened, his knuckles turning white. And you've decided I'm not successful or important based on… What, exactly? The fact that I use a wheelchair? The color of my skin? Please enlighten me. I'm curious to know exactly how you've determined my worth as a customer. Kelly's face flushed, a mixture of anger and embarrassment coloring her cheeks. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. For the first time, she seemed to realize just how far she had crossed the line. The silence stretched between them, thick with tension. Around them, the other customers shifted uncomfortably, some averting their eyes, while others watched with undisguised interest. A few whispered among themselves, their hushed voices barely audible above the store's background music. Finally, Kelly spoke, her voice strained. Sir, I think it's best if you leave. Clearly, there's been a misunderstanding and dash. The only misunderstanding, David interrupted, his voice firm but controlled, is your assumption that you can judge a person's worth based on appearance alone. I came here today as a customer, ready and able to make a significant purchase. Instead, I've been insulted, belittled, and discriminated against. Is this how your store treats all its potential clients? Or am I receiving special treatment? As the confrontation between Kelly and David unfolded, a well-dressed man stood quietly in a corner of the store, his keen eyes taking in every detail of the scene. Jonathan Parker, the new owner of Lux Emporium, had chosen this day for an unannounced visit, hoping to observe the day-to-day operations of his latest acquisition. What he witnessed, however, was far from the excellence in customer service he had expected. Mr. Parker cut an impressive figure in his tailored charcoal suit, his salt and pepper hair neatly styled, and his polished Oxfords gleaming under the store's elegant lighting. He was precisely the type of customer Kelly would typically fawn over, wealthy, sophisticated, and exuding an air of importance. Yet, in her misguided focus on David's perceived inadequacy, she remained oblivious to Mr. Parker's presence. From his vantage point near a display of fine leather goods, Mr. Parker watched as Kelly's behavior towards David grew increasingly hostile. His brow furrowed in disappointment and barely contained anger as he observed the blatant discrimination unfolding before him. Every dismissive gesture, every condescending word from Kelly felt like a personal affront to the values he held dear and the vision he had for Lux Emporium. As David struggled to maintain his composure in the face of Kelly's rudeness, Mr. Parker found himself impressed by the man's dignity and restraint. He noticed the way David's hands gripped the armrests of his wheelchair, the subtle tension in his shoulders betraying the emotional toll of the encounter. Yet, David's voice remained calm and measured, a stark contrast to Kelly's barely concealed contempt. Mr. Parker's mind raced as he considered how to address this situation. As a new owner, he had hoped to spend some time quietly assessing the store before making any major changes. But what he was witnessing demanded immediate action. He couldn't stand by and allow such blatant discrimination to occur in his establishment. Just as he was about to step forward and intervene, Mr. Parker noticed a shift in David's demeanor. The calm resolve that had characterized David's behavior throughout the ordeal seemed to waver, replaced by a weariness that was painful to observe. It was clear that David had reached his breaking point. With a deep breath, David began to maneuver his wheelchair away from the watch display where Kelly stood, her arms crossed and a look of smug satisfaction on her face. Mr. Parker held back, curious to see how this final interaction would play out. David paused as he reached Kelly, looking up at her with a mixture of disappointment and resignation. "Ms. Matthews," he said, his voice low but clear, "I came here today with the intention of making a significant purchase. I had saved for months, looking forward to buying a timepiece that would commemorate a personal milestone. Kelly's expression flickered, a momentary crack in her haughty facade. But before she could respond, David continued. However, the treatment I've received here today has been nothing short of appalling. Your assumptions about my worth based solely on my appearance and disability are not only offensive, but also incredibly short-sighted. I will be taking my business elsewhere, to an establishment that values all its customers equally. For a brief moment, uncertainty flashed across Kelly's face, but it was quickly replaced by a smirk, her previous disdain reasserting itself. Well, she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm, I'm sure we'll manage to survive without your significant purchase. Perhaps you'll find a store more suited to your particular situation. David shook his head sadly. You know, Ms. Matthews, the truly unfortunate thing here is not that you've lost a sale. It's that you've lost an opportunity to grow, to challenge your preconceptions, and to treat a fellow human being with basic dignity and respect. I sincerely hope that someday you'll realize the harm your attitude causes, not just to others, but to yourself as well. With those parting words, David began to wheel himself towards the store's exit. Mr. Parker watched as he moved, his posture straight and his head held high despite the humiliation he had endured. It was a powerful image, a man refusing to be diminished by the small-mindedness of others. As David neared the door, Mr. Parker made a decision. He couldn't allow this man to leave feeling unwelcome and undervalued. More importantly, he couldn't let this teachable moment slip away. It was time to reveal himself and address the underlying issues that had led to this unacceptable situation. Just as David was about to push open the door, Mr. Parker stepped forward, his voice carrying clearly across the now-hushed store. Mr. Williams, he called out, causing David to pause and turn his wheelchair around. If you could spare a few more minutes of your time, I believe there are some matters we need to discuss. David looked at Mr. Parker with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. After his experience with Kelly, he was understandably hesitant to engage with another store employee. But something in Mr. Parker's demeanor, a blend of authority and genuine concern, made him reconsider. And you are? David asked, his tone cautious but not unfriendly. Mr. Parker smiled, a warm gesture that seemed to put David at ease. My name is Jonathan Parker, he said, stepping closer and extending his hand. I'm the new owner of Lux Emporium, and I owe you an apology for the treatment you've received here today. A ripple of surprise ran through the store. Customers who had been pretending not to watch the earlier confrontation now openly stared, whispering among themselves. Kelly, who had been straightening a display with feigned nonchalance, froze in place, her face draining of color as she realized the gravity of her actions. David shook Mr. Parker's offered hand, his expression a mix of surprise and intrigue. I appreciate the apology, Mr. Parker, he said, but I'm not sure it's yours to give. You weren't the one who treated me poorly. Mr. Parker nodded, his expression serious. You're absolutely right, Mr. Williams. The apology for the direct mistreatment you faced should come from those responsible. However, as the owner of this establishment, I am ultimately responsible for the culture that allows such behavior to occur. For that, I am deeply sorry. He gestured towards a quiet corner of the store where two comfortable armchairs sat next to a small table. Would you mind joining me for a conversation? I'd like to hear more about your experience today, and if you're willing, I'd appreciate your insights on how we can do better. David hesitated for a moment, glancing towards the door. He had been so ready to leave, to put this humiliating experience behind him. But the sincerity in Mr. Parker's voice and the opportunity to potentially affect real change made him reconsider. All right, David said finally, wheeling his chair towards the indicated spot. I can spare a few more minutes. As Mr. Parker and David moved to the seating area, the store seemed to collectively hold its breath. Customers watched with undisguised interest, while employees tried to look busy while straining to hear what was being said. Kelly stood rooted to her spot, her earlier smugness replaced by a growing sense of dread. She had assumed David was nobody important, someone she could dismiss without consequence. But now, watching him engage in earnest conversation with the store's owner, she began to realize the magnitude of her error. Mr. Parker leaned in, listening intently as David recounted his experience in the store. His face grew increasingly grave as David described Kelly's dismissive attitude, her snide comments, and her blatant assumptions based on David's appearance and disability. "Mr. Williams," Mr. Parker said once David had finished speaking, "I want to thank you for your honesty and for the dignity with which you've handled this situation. The treatment you received is completely unacceptable and goes against everything I want Lux Emporium to represent." David nodded, appreciating the acknowledgement. "I'm glad to hear that, Mr. Parker. But I have to ask, what do you plan to do about it? Will this just be a momentary embarrassment for your employee, or will there be real changes?" Mr. Parker's expression turned resolute. "There will absolutely be changes, Mr. Williams. Significant ones. What happened here today has made it clear that we need a complete overhaul of our training procedures and our company culture." He glanced around the store, taking in the rapt attention of both customers and employees. "Luxury isn't just about expensive products," he said, his voice carrying clearly. "True luxury is about treating every person who walks through our doors with respect and dignity. It's about recognizing the inherent worth of each individual, regardless of their appearance, abilities, or perceived social status." David listened, nodding slowly. "Those are fine words, Mr. Parker. But how will you put them into action?" "Excellent question," Mr. Parker replied. "For starters, we'll be implementing comprehensive sensitivity and inclusivity training for all staff. We'll be reviewing our hiring practices to ensure we're building a diverse team that can better serve all our customers. And we'll be establishing clear protocols for addressing and reporting any instances of discrimination." He paused, his gaze falling on Kelly, who was trying her best to blend into the background. "There will also be immediate consequences for the kind of behavior you experienced today. We cannot and will not tolerate discrimination in any form." David followed Mr. Parker's gaze, noting Kelly's obvious discomfort. Despite the hurt and anger he still felt, he found himself hoping that this experience would lead to genuine growth and change, not just punishment. "Mr. Parker," David said, turning back to the owner, "I appreciate your commitment to making changes. But may I make a suggestion?" "Of course," Mr. Parker replied, leaning forward with interest. "Instead of just punishing the employee who treated me poorly, why not use this as a learning opportunity? Perhaps she, and others who may share our biases, could be involved in developing and implementing these new policies. Sometimes, the best way to change a perspective is to actively engage in creating the solution." Mr. Parker's eyebrows rose, impressed by David's insight and compassion. "That's an excellent idea, Mr. Williams. It's exactly that kind of thinking that we need to create lasting change." He stood up, offering his hand to David once again. "Mr. Williams, I know you came here today intending to make a purchase. While I completely understand if you no longer wish to do business with us, I would be honored if you'd allow me to personally assist you in finding the perfect timepiece. Consider it a small gesture of apology and a symbol of our commitment to do better." David considered the offer for a moment before a small smile crossed his face. "Well, Mr. Parker, I did have my heart set on one of your watches. And I suppose helping to spark positive change is as good a reason as any to celebrate. Why don't you show me what you have?" As Mr. Parker began to lead David back towards the watch display, he paused, turning to address the store at large. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for any disruption to your shopping experience today. What you've witnessed is not representative of the values of Lux Emporium. I assure you that we are committed to providing an inclusive and respectful environment for all our customers." He then turned to the employees, his gaze lingering on Kelly. "Staff meeting in 1 hour. We have important matters to discuss." With that, Mr. Parker returned his attention to David, engaging him in a warm conversation about watches as they made their way across the store. The tension in the air began to dissipate, replaced by a sense of cautious optimism. As for Kelly, she stood quietly, her earlier arrogance replaced by a mix of shame and uncertainty. She watched as Mr. Parker treated David with the respect and attention she should have shown from the beginning. It was a powerful lesson, one that would stay with her for a long time to come. The afternoon sun slanted through the store's windows, casting long shadows across the polished floors. In its golden light, The watches and jewelry sparkled, but it was the promise of change and growth that truly shone in Lux Emporium that day. The gentle chime of the store's closing bell echoed through Lux Emporium, signaling the end of what had been a transformative day for everyone involved. As the last customers filtered out, a palpable tension hung in the air. The employees, still reeling from the afternoon's events, gathered nervously near the center of the store, their eyes darting between Mr. Parker, David, and Kelly. Jonathan Parker stood at the front, his posture straight and his expression serious. Beside him, David Williams sat in his wheelchair, a beautifully wrapped package containing his new watch resting in his lap. The contrast between the two men was striking. One the very picture of corporate success, the other defying societal expectations with his mere presence. Yet in that moment, they stood united in their desire for change. Kelly Matthews lingered at the back of the group, her earlier confidence shattered. She tugged nervously at the sleeve of her designer blouse, her eyes fixed on the polished floor. The weight of her actions pressed heavily upon her shoulders, and for the first time in years, she felt truly out of her depth. Mr. Parker cleared his throat, drawing everyone's attention. "Thank you all for staying late today," he began, his voice calm but authoritative. "I know it's been an eventful afternoon, to say the least. But what happened here today is something we need to address head-on." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the assembled staff. Luxury isn't just about the products we sell. It's about the experience we provide, the respect we show, and the values we uphold. Today, we failed in that mission. But failure can be a powerful teacher if we're willing to learn from it. A murmur rippled through the group. Some nodded in agreement, while others shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact. Mr. Parker continued, his tone growing more passionate. "From this day forward, we're going to redefine what luxury means at Lux Emporium. It won't just be about catering to the wealthy or the fashionable. True luxury is about recognizing the inherent worth and dignity of every person who walks through our doors, regardless of their appearance, ability, or background." He turned to David, gesturing for him to speak. David wheeled forward slightly, his presence commanding attention despite his seated position. "I came here today hoping to celebrate a personal milestone," David began, his voice steady and clear. "Instead, I found myself facing discrimination and prejudice. It's an experience that, unfortunately, is all too familiar for many people with disabilities or anyone who doesn't fit a narrow definition of what a valuable customer looks like." He paused, his gaze falling on Kelly. She flinched slightly but forced herself to meet his eyes. "But what happened today doesn't have to be the end of the story," David continued. "It could be a beginning, a chance for all of us to examine our biases, to challenge our assumptions, and to grow. I believe that change is possible, but it requires honesty, effort, and a willingness to be uncomfortable." Mr. Parker nodded appreciatively. "Thank you, Mr. Williams. Your insights and your willingness to engage with us after your experience are truly commendable." He turned back to the staff. "Over the coming weeks and months, we'll be implementing a comprehensive training program focused on inclusivity, diversity, and respectful customer service. This isn't just a box to check. It's going to be an ongoing process of learning and growth for all of us." He paused, his expression growing more serious. "Now, I want to address the specific incident that occurred today." All eyes turned to Kelly, who seemed to shrink under the collective gaze. "Kelly," Mr. Parker said, his tone firm but not unkind, "your behavior today was unacceptable. It goes against everything we should stand for as a company and as human beings. Under normal circumstances, this kind of discriminatory conduct would be grounds for immediate termination." Kelly's face paled, her hands trembling slightly as she braced for the worst. But Mr. Parker wasn't finished. "However," he continued, "Mr. Williams has suggested an alternative approach, one that I believe has merit. Instead of simply punishing you, we're going to give you an opportunity to be part of the solution." Kelly looked up, confusion and a glimmer of hope battling in her eyes. Mr. Parker went on to explain, "You'll be working closely with our new diversity and inclusion team to develop and implement our training programs. You'll also be taking on a special project, reaching out to organizations that support people with disabilities and other marginalized groups to explore how we can make Lux Emporium more accessible and welcoming to all. He fixed Kelly with a stern look. This is not a light undertaking, Kelly. It will require hard work, honest self-reflection, and a genuine commitment to change. If at any point we feel you're not taking this seriously or making real progress, further action will be taken. Do you understand? Kelly nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. Yes, Mr. Parker. I understand. David spoke up, his tone gentle but firm. Kelly, I want you to know that I don't harbor any ill will towards you. What you did was wrong, yes, but it's also an opportunity. An opportunity to challenge your assumptions, to broaden your perspective, and to become a force for positive change. Are you willing to embrace that opportunity? Kelly met David's gaze, tears welling in her eyes. Yes, she said, her voice stronger now. Yes, I am. Mr. Williams, Mr. Parker, I am so sorry for my behavior. I know words aren't enough, but I promise I'll do everything I can to make this right. Mr. Parker nodded, a small smile crossing his face. That's all we can ask, Kelly. Now let's talk about how we're going to move forward. The meeting continued late into the evening, with Mr. Parker outlining his vision for a more inclusive Lux Emporium. As the discussion progressed, a sense of cautious optimism began to grow among the staff. There was nervousness about the changes to come, certainly, but also excitement at the prospect of being part of something truly transformative. As the meeting drew to a close, David prepared to leave. Mr. Parker approached him one last time, extending his hand. Mr. Williams, thank you again for your grace and insight today. You've given us a valuable gift, the opportunity to learn and grow. I hope you'll consider staying involved as we implement these changes. Your perspective would be invaluable. David shook Mr. Parker's hand firmly. I'd be honored, Mr. Parker. And please call me David. With final goodbyes exchanged, David made his way out of the store, the weight of his new watch a pleasant reminder on his wrist. As he navigated his wheelchair down the now-quiet street, he felt a mix of emotions, lingering hurt from the day's earlier events, yes, but also hope for the changes to come. The story of Lux Emporium's transformation had only just begun. In the weeks that followed, Lux Emporium underwent a profound metamorphosis. The physical space remained as opulent as ever, with gleaming displays and luxurious furnishings, but the atmosphere had shifted. There was a new warmth to the air, a sense of genuine welcome that greeted every customer who walked through the doors. Kelly Matthews found herself at the center of this transformation, though not in the way she would have ever expected. Gone was the sharp-edged saleswoman who measured a person's worth by the price tag of their clothes. In her place was a woman on a mission, driven by a mix of remorse for her past actions and a genuine desire to be better. Her days were now filled with meetings, workshops, and countless conversations that challenged everything she thought she knew about success, worth, and human dignity. She worked closely with disability rights organizations, learning about the daily challenges faced by people with mobility issues, visual impairments, and other disabilities. Each interaction chipped away at her preconceptions, reshaping her worldview in ways both subtle and profound. One particularly transformative experience came when Kelly spent a day navigating the city in a wheelchair, guided by a disability rights advocate. The simple act of trying to enter buildings, use public transportation, or even just move down a crowded sidewalk opened her eyes to the myriad obstacles faced by wheelchair users every day. By the time she returned to Lux Emporium, exhausted and humbled, Kelly's perspective had shifted dramatically. Back at the store, changes were happening on multiple fronts. The layout was adjusted to ensure easy navigation for wheelchair users and people with mobility aids. Staff underwent intensive training on respectful interaction with customers of all abilities and backgrounds. Perhaps most significantly, Lux Emporium partnered with several organizations to launch a program showcasing adaptive fashion and accessories, bringing a new dimension of inclusivity to the world of luxury retail. David Williams became a regular presence at the store, consulting on accessibility issues and sharing his insights during staff training sessions. His warmth and openness, even in the face of occasional missteps or awkward questions, set a tone of patience and understanding that permeated the entire organization. Mr. Parker, for his part, threw himself fully into the transformation. He became a vocal advocate for inclusivity in the luxury retail sector, speaking at industry events and challenging other high-end brands to follow Lux Emporium's lead. Under his guidance, the store began actively recruiting employees from diverse backgrounds, including people with disabilities, creating a staff that better reflected the community it served. As word of Lux Emporium's changes spread, the store began attracting a more diverse clientele. Wheelchair users who had previously felt unwelcome in luxury spaces now found themselves greeted with genuine warmth. Customers with visual impairments appreciated the staff's thoughtful descriptions of products and willingness to accommodate their needs. The store even began offering sign language interpreters for deaf customers, a service that was virtually unheard of in the world of high-end retail. But perhaps the most profound change was in the staff themselves, particularly Kelly. The woman who had once dismissed David based on his appearance was now one of the store's most passionate advocates for inclusivity. She threw herself into learning about adaptive fashion, researching how luxury items could be modified to better serve customers with various disabilities. Her enthusiasm was infectious, inspiring her colleagues to approach their work with a new sense of purpose and empathy. One sunny afternoon, about 3 months after the incident that had sparked this transformation, David rolled into Lux Emporium for one of his regular consulting visits. The store was bustling with activity, a diverse mix of customers browsing the gleaming displays. As he made his way through the aisles, David couldn't help but smile at the changes he saw. Near the watch counter, a sales associate was carefully describing the intricate details of a timepiece to a customer with a white cane, her voice painting a vivid picture of the watch's design. In the clothing section, another employee was showing a wheelchair user how certain luxury garments could be tailored for easier dressing. The atmosphere was one of warmth and genuine engagement, a far cry from the cold elitism that had once defined the space. As David approached the customer service desk, he was greeted by a familiar face. Kelly stood there, her expression lighting up as she saw him. "David," she called out warmly. "It's so good to see you. How are you doing?" The change in Kelly never failed to amaze David. Gone was the haughty disdain that had characterized their first encounter. In its place was a genuine warmth and respect that seemed to radiate from her very being. "I'm doing well, Kelly," David replied with a smile. "How are things going here? I see it's busy today." Kelly's eyes sparkled with enthusiasm. "Oh, David, it's been amazing. You won't believe what happened yesterday. We had a group visit from that adaptive sports organization I've been working with. One of the athletes, a Paralympic swimmer, fell in love with one of our watches. But the clasp was a bit tricky for her to manage with her limited hand mobility." She paused, her excitement palpable. "So, you know what we did? We got in touch with the manufacturer right there, and then we're now working with them to design a modified clasp that will be easier for people with dexterity issues to use. And get this, they're considering making it a standard option for the entire line." David's eyebrows rose, genuinely impressed. "That's incredible, Kelly. You're really making a difference here." Kelly's expression softened, a touch of vulnerability showing through her excitement. "I couldn't have done any of this without you, David. Your forgiveness, your willingness to give me a chance to learn and grow, it changed everything for me. I just hope I'm making you proud, making up for how I treated you that day." David reached out, gently patting Kelly's hand. "Kelly, you've more than made up for it. What you're doing here, the changes you're helping to create, it's going to have an impact far beyond just this store. You should be proud of yourself." Tears welled up in Kelly's eyes, but she blinked them back, straightening her shoulders. "Thank you, David. That means more than you know." She took a deep breath, composing herself. "Now, let me show you some of the new adaptive accessories we've got in. I think you're going to love them." As Kelly led David through the store, pointing out new products and innovations, Mr. Parker watched from his office overlooking the sales floor. He smiled to himself, marveling at the transformation he was witnessing. In Kelly and David, he saw the embodiment of what Lux Emporium could be, a place where luxury wasn't just about expensive products, but about treating every person with dignity, respect, and genuine care. The incident that had brought them all together could have been a disaster for the store. Instead, it had become the catalyst for a revolution in the world of luxury retail. As he watched Kelly and David laughing together over a display of elegantly designed adaptive utensils, Mr. Parker felt a surge of pride and hope for the future. Lux Emporium was no longer just a store. It was becoming a beacon of inclusivity in an industry long known for its exclusivity. And this, Mr. Parker realized, was the truest luxury of all: the ability to create a space where everyone, regardless of their abilities or background, could feel valued, respected, and welcome. As the afternoon wore on, the store continued to buzz with activity. Customers of all kinds moved through the space, admiring the luxurious goods on display. But more than the products, it was the atmosphere of warmth and inclusivity that seemed to captivate everyone who entered. In one corner, a young woman with Down syndrome was being fitted for a beautiful evening gown, her face alight with joy as the tailor discussed how to adjust the design to perfectly suit her. Nearby, an elderly gentleman with a hearing aid was deep in conversation with a sales associate who was patiently explaining the features of a high-end smartphone using a tablet to provide visual aids. Kelly and David made their way through the store, stopping occasionally to chat with customers and staff. Their easy rapport was a testament to how far they had come. Their initial conflict transformed into a partnership that was helping to reshape the very notion of luxury retail. As they approached the watch section, they overheard a conversation that made them both pause. A middle-aged woman in a wheelchair was speaking to one of the newer sales associates, her tone frustrated. "I'm sorry, but I don't think you understand," the woman was saying. "I love the watch, but the crown is too small for me to adjust comfortably. Is there really nothing you can do?" The sales associate looked flustered, clearly unsure how to handle the situation. I'm not sure. Let me get my manager dash." Kelly stepped forward smoothly, with David close behind. "Excuse me," she said warmly. "I couldn't help overhearing. I'm Kelly, the assistant manager. May I ask what the issue is?" The woman in the wheelchair looked up, her expression a mix of frustration and hope. "I've had my eye on this watch for months, but I have limited dexterity in my hands due to arthritis. The crown is just too small for me to manage comfortably. Your associate here doesn't seem to know if anything can be done." Kelly nodded understanding, her mind already racing with possibilities. "I see. Well, we certainly don't want something like that to stand between you and your dream watch. Would you mind if I took a closer look?" As Kelly examined the watch, she glanced at David, who gave her an encouraging nod. She turned back to the customer with a smile. We recently started a partnership with our watch manufacturers to create more accessible designs. I think we might be able to work with them to develop a custom crown that would be easier for you to use. It might take a little time, but if you're willing to wait, I believe we can make this work for you." The woman's eyes widened in surprise. "Really? You do that?" "Of course," Kelly replied without hesitation. "At Lux Emporium, we believe that luxury should be accessible to everyone. We'd be honored to work with you to create a watch that's not just beautiful, but perfectly suited to your needs." As Kelly began to discuss the details with the delighted customer, David felt a surge of pride. This was the Kelly he had hoped would emerge from that difficult day months ago. Empathetic, creative, and genuinely committed to serving all customers. The woman's eyes lit up with excitement as Kelly explained the process of creating a custom watch crown. "I can't believe this," she said, shaking her head in wonder. "I've been to so many luxury stores, and no one has ever offered to do something like this for me." Kelly smiled warmly. "Well, we're trying to do things differently here at Lux Emporium. Luxury shouldn't be exclusive, it should be inclusive." As Kelly continued to work with the customer, David wheeled over to the young sales associate who had initially struggled with the situation. The associate looked nervous, clearly afraid he had made a mistake. "Don't worry," David said gently. "You did the right thing by offering to get your manager. But let's talk about how you might handle a situation like this in the future." Over the next few minutes, David walked the associate through some strategies for addressing accessibility concerns. He emphasized the importance of listening to the customer's needs, thinking creatively about solutions, and never being afraid to ask for help or suggest customization options. The associate listened intently, his initial nervousness giving way to genuine interest. "Thank you, sir," he said when David had finished. "I want to do better for our customers. Would it be okay if I came to you with questions sometimes? About how to better serve customers with disabilities?" David's face broke into a warm smile. "I'd be more than happy to help. And please call me David. We're all in this together." As the afternoon wore on, the store continued to buzz with activity. Mr. Parker, who had been observing from a distance, finally made his way down to the sales floor. He approached Kelly just as she was finishing up with the customer who needed the custom watch crown. "Kelly," he said, a note of pride in his voice, "that was excellent work. You've really taken our mission of inclusivity to heart." Kelly beamed at the praise. "Thank you, Mr. Parker. I've learned so much these past few months. I never realized before how many barriers exist for people with disabilities, even in something like buying a luxury watch. But now that I see it, I can't unsee it, and I want to do everything I can to break down those barriers." Mr. Parker nodded approvingly. "That's exactly the attitude we need. In fact, I've been thinking about taking our commitment to inclusivity a step further. How would you feel about heading up a new department focused specifically on adaptive luxury goods?" Kelly's eyes widened in surprise. "Me? Are you sure?" "Absolutely," Mr. Parker replied. "You've shown incredible growth and dedication. I think you're the perfect person to lead this initiative." As Kelly processed this news, David wheeled up to join them. "That's a fantastic idea," he said, having overheard the conversation. "Kelly's passion for this is obvious. I think she'd do an amazing job." Kelly looked between Mr. Parker and David, feeling a surge of emotion. Just a few months ago, she had been at risk of losing her job due to her discriminatory behavior. Now, she was being offered an opportunity to lead a groundbreaking new initiative. The magnitude of the change wasn't lost on her. I don't know what to say," Kelly stammered. "Thank you for your faith in me. I promise I won't let you down." Mr. Parker smiled warmly. "I know you won't. Now, why don't we all sit down and start brainstorming some ideas for this new department?" As they made their way to a quiet corner of the store, they passed by a group of customers gathered around a new display. The display showcased a line of luxury bags that had been specially designed to attach easily to wheelchairs without compromising on style or quality. A young woman in a power wheelchair was examining one of the bags, her face alight with excitement. "I've never seen anything like this before," the woman was saying to her friend. "Usually, accessible products are so medical-looking. But this is actually chic." Kelly paused, watching the scene with a sense of pride and purpose. This was why she had thrown herself so wholeheartedly into learning about accessibility and inclusive design. Moments like these, seeing the joy on a customer's face when they found a product that truly worked for them, made all the hard work worthwhile. As they settled into their impromptu meeting, ideas began to flow freely. David shared insights from his own experiences and those of other people with disabilities he knew. Kelly contributed her growing knowledge of adaptive design and the luxury market. Mr. Parker listened intently, occasionally asking probing questions or offering suggestions. "What if we partnered with fashion schools?" Kelly suggested at one point. "We could sponsor a design competition focused on adaptive luxury clothing. It would not only generate new ideas, but also help raise awareness among the next generation of designers." David nodded enthusiastically. "That's a great idea. And we could involve people with disabilities as judges and consultants for the competition. It's crucial that the end users have a voice in the design process." Mr. Parker jotted down notes, his excitement growing with each new idea. "This is exactly the kind of innovative thinking we need," he said. "We're not just changing our store, we're working to change the entire industry." As their discussion continued, other staff members began to drift over, drawn by the energy and enthusiasm radiating from the group. Soon, what had started as a small meeting had grown into an impromptu brainstorming session involving nearly half the store's employees. Ideas bounced back and forth. Adaptive jewelry that could be easily clasped with one hand. Luxury shoes designed for people with prosthetic limbs. High-end home goods that seamlessly incorporated universal design principles. The creativity and passion in the room were palpable. In the midst of this flurry of ideas, Kelly found herself stepping back for a moment, overcome by emotion. She caught David's eye, and he wheeled over to her, concern etched on his face. "Kelly, are you okay?" he asked softly. Kelly nodded, wiping away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. "I'm more than okay, David. I can't believe how much has changed. How much I've changed. A few months ago, I would have scoffed at the idea of all this. I was so caught up in a narrow idea of what luxury meant, of who deserved to be our customers. And now," David reached out, gently squeezing her hand. "And now you're leading the charge to make luxury accessible to everyone. You've come a long way, Kelly. Thanks to you," Kelly said, her voice thick with emotion. "If you hadn't given me a chance that day, if you had just let Mr. Parker fire me like I deserved, none of this would be happening." David shook his head. "You're giving me too much credit. Yes, I suggested giving you a chance, but you're the one who did the hard work. You're the one who opened your mind and your heart, who pushed yourself to learn and grow. This is all you, Kelly." Before Kelly could respond, Mr. Parker's voice cut through the chatter of the room. "Everyone, if I could have your attention for a moment." The room quieted as all eyes turned to him. "I want to thank you all for your enthusiasm and your ideas. What I'm seeing here today, this passion, this commitment to inclusivity, this is the future of Lux Emporium. Each and every one of you should be proud of the part you're playing in this transformation." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the room before landing on Kelly and David. "But I want to give special recognition to two people who have been instrumental in getting us to this point. David, your willingness to work with us, to share your insights and experiences, has been invaluable. You've opened our eyes to possibilities we never would have seen otherwise." David nodded graciously, a slight flush coloring his cheeks at the public recognition. Mr. Parker continued, "And Kelly, your journey over these past few months has been nothing short of inspirational. You've shown us all what's possible when we open our minds and challenge our preconceptions. Your dedication to making Lux Emporium a truly inclusive space has been the driving force behind so much of the progress we've made." Kelly felt tears welling up again, but this time she didn't try to hold them back. She let them fall freely, a physical manifestation of the profound change she had undergone. "Thank you all," Mr. Parker concluded. "This is just the beginning. Together, we're going to redefine what luxury means for a new, more inclusive era." As the impromptu meeting broke up and people began to drift back to their regular duties, there was a new energy in the air. Conversations buzzed with excitement about the ideas that had been shared, about the possibilities that lay ahead. Kelly found herself surrounded by colleagues, all eager to share more ideas or to volunteer for the new adaptive luxury department. As she fielded questions and jotted down notes, she felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned to find David beside her, a wide smile on his face. "Looks like you're going to be busy," he said with a chuckle. Kelly laughed, the sound full of joy and purpose. "Busier than I've ever been. But you know what? I can't wait. For the first time in my career, I feel like I'm doing something that really matters." David's expression softened. "It does matter, Kelly. More than you know. What you're doing here, what all of you are doing, it's going to change lives. It already has changed lives." He gestured around the store, where customers of all abilities were in gag, ing with staff, examining products, and moving through the space with ease. "Look around. This is what inclusivity looks like. This is what it means to truly value every customer, every person." Kelly followed his gaze, seeing the store through new eyes. She saw the woman in the wheelchair, still excitedly examining the adaptive luxury bag. She saw a man with a prosthetic arm being shown a line of shirts with magnetic buttons, his face lighting up at the ease of use. She saw an elderly couple working with a patient sales associate to find a pair of luxury sneakers that would be stable and comfortable for their troubled feet. In each interaction, she saw not just transactions, but connections. She saw dignity being honored, needs being met, dreams being fulfilled. This, she realized, was the true meaning of luxury. Not exclusivity, but inclusivity. Not creating barriers, but breaking them down. As the day wound to a close and the last customers left the store, Kelly found herself standing with David and Mr. Parker near the front entrance. The three of them looked out over the now-quiet sales floor, each lost in their own thoughts about the day's events and the changes to come. Mr. Parker was the first to break the silence. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "when I bought this store, I had a vision of creating the ultimate luxury experience. I thought that meant catering to the elite, creating an air of exclusivity." He shook his head, a rueful smile on his face. "I never imagined that the path to true luxury would be through inclusivity." David nodded. "Luxury isn't about exclusion. It's about making everyone feel valued, respected, and catered to. What you're doing here, it's revolutionary." Kelly, who had been quiet, finally spoke up. I think this is just the beginning. There's so much more we can do, so many more people we can reach." She turned to Mr. Parker, her eyes shining with determination. "If you're serious about this new department, I have about 1,000,000 ideas I want to get started on right away." Mr. Parker laughed, the sound full of warmth and approval. "I don't doubt it for a second, Kelly, and I can't wait to see where those ideas take us." As they prepared to leave for the day, Kelly found herself taking one last look around the store. Her gaze fell on the spot where, months ago, she had treated David so poorly. The memory still stung, but now it was tempered by the knowledge of how far she had come, of the growth that had sprouted from that moment of shame. She turned to David, her expression serious. "I know I've said it before, but I want to say it again. I'm so sorry for how I treated you that day. And I'm so grateful for the chance you gave me to learn and to change." David reached out, clasping her hand in his. "Kelly, you've more than made up for it. What you're doing now, the change you're creating, it's going to have an impact far beyond just this store. You should be proud of yourself. I know I'm proud to know you." As they said their goodbyes and prepared to go their separate ways, there was a sense of anticipation in the air. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to push the boundaries of what inclusive luxury could mean. But for now, they could rest easy, knowing that they were part of something truly special, a revolution in the world of luxury retail, one that valued every customer and celebrated the rich diversity of human experience. As the lights dimmed in Lux Emporium, the gleaming displays stood as silent witnesses to the transformation that had taken place. The watches, jewelry, and designer clothes were the same as they had always been, but the spirit of the place had changed fundamentally. In the quiet of the empty store, one could almost feel the promise of a new era of luxury, one that was open, accessible, and welcoming to all. And so, as night fell on this extraordinary day, Lux Emporium stood not just as a high-end retail store, but as a beacon of change in an industry long overdue for transformation. The story of Kelly, David, and the remarkable metamorphosis of Lux Emporium was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. What would you do if you were in David's shoes, quietly facing discrimination, but holding on to your dignity? And if you were in Kelly's position, realizing your mistake and being given a second chance to make amends, would you take that opportunity to right your wrongs? If this story of growth, second chances, and the impact of kindness moved you, please consider subscribing to my channel. I put my heart into these meaningful stories, and your support helps me continue to share them with the world. Thank you for being a part of this journey.